익혀서 드실 수 있게 하고 하다 보니까 오이도에 조개구이를 드시러 많이 오시는 것 같아요.
여자친구가 근교로 가보자고 해서 알아보게 됐는데 여기가 맛있다고 글을 많이 보게 돼서 찾아오게 됐어요.
진짜 맛있어요. 네.
In our headlines on this Tuesday, September 16th, here in South Korea. Speaking at a weekly cabinet meeting today in the administrative city of Sejong, President Lee Jae-myung highlights the importance of balanced regional growth to ensure sustainable national development. Meanwhile, starting on this Tuesday, Japanese cars, light trucks and auto parts face a 15% US tariff, while South Korea continues to see 25% tariff for its automobiles and their parts. And stock markets here in South Korea and over in the US, as well as in neighboring Japan, have been rallying to record highs in recent days in much anticipation of a rate cut by the US Federal Reserve this week. We start with a fresh pledge to promote balanced regional growth by President Lee Jae-myung, which he added is no longer an option but an obligation for sustainable development. Our top office correspondent Yoon Jung-min starts us off.
Achieving sustainable growth is a key task for the nation, and it is possible through balanced growth. This is according to President Lee Jae-myung as he presided over the weekly cabinet meeting on Tuesday at the Sejong government complex in the administrative city of Sejong for the first time since taking office.
대한민국의 지속적인 성장 발전을 위해서 이제는 국가 균형 발전이 선택이 아니라 이제 운명이 됐다 이렇게 생각이 듭니다.
To shift away from a system heavily concentrated in the capital, the new government is pushing a key national agenda to balance development across other regions, divided into 5 key hubs, including the Seoul metropolitan area, and 3 special governing areas, Gangwon, Jeonbuk, and Jeju.
Currently, we have a balanced growth system that treats regions equally, but it will be converted into concentration and connection, focusing on intensive regional units.
In line with that, the president renewed his pledge to build another presidential office in Sejong, as well as a National Assembly building. And noting Youth Week, President Lee stated the need to boost employment among young people, pointing to the August job report that showed the employment rate of people aged 15 to 29 declining for the 16th straight month.
청년 고용 문제 해결을 위해서는 정부뿐 아니라 기업의 노력도 필요합니다. 청년도 기업도 국가도 모두가 윈윈하는
During Tuesday's meeting, the Lee administration's 123 policy tasks unveiled last month were confirmed by the cabinet, which will serve as a roadmap for the next 5 years. Among a wide range of areas, key agenda items include introducing 2 4-year presidential terms instead of the current single 5-year term. South Korea also aims to bolster its 3-axis defense system, as well as take back wartime operational control from Washington. On the economy, the authorities will focus on fostering new growth engines involving AI and biotechnology. The government made sure these are carried out in the right direction through a monitoring system, while creating an online platform where ordinary people can pitch their ideas. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
In the U.S., starting on this Tuesday, Japanese cars, light trucks and auto parts face a 15% U.S. tariff, while South Korea continues to see 25% tariff for its automobiles and their parts. Our correspondent Kim Do-yeon has more.
A notice on the U.S. Federal Register has made it official. As of Tuesday U.S. time, the tariff on Japanese-made cars and auto parts will fall to 15%. That's a sharp drop from the 27.5% rate Japanese automakers had been paying, which included a 25% tariff under Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act. The decision immediately reshapes the competitive landscape in the U.S., one of the world's biggest auto markets. With negotiations on a $350 billion investment package ongoing, South Korean auto exports, the #1 export to the U.S., will continue to face a 25% tariff. It leaves South Korean automakers, who are also subject to Section 232 tariffs, at a significant disadvantage, with South Korean and Japanese cars also competing in the same price groups. South Korea's Trade Minister Yo Han-gu is currently in Washington to finalize those talks. Negotiations have reportedly stalled over the terms of the investment deal. Minister Yo says he is focused on getting the lower rate applied as quickly as possible, but not at the expense of South Korea's national interest.
We are working to have the 15% rate applied as quickly as possible. This is a negotiation process. So rather than being swayed by every turn, we are focused on achieving a final result that we can accept.
Meanwhile, Yeo also touched on the recent detention of Korean workers by U.S. immigration authorities at a Hyundai plant in Georgia.
It seems the U.S. side also feels its action was a bit excessive, and we will do our best to ensure the interests of our company are reflected.
The trade minister is expected to stay in Washington for 3 days as he works to finalize a deal on the critical tariff issue. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, Washington and Beijing have reportedly framed out a broad agreement on the ownership of TikTok's U.S. operation, and details of the deal will be addressed by the leaders of the two countries during talks on the phone this coming Friday. Our Lee Seung-jae has the latest.
Washington says the United States and China have reached a framework agreement on the future of TikTok's U.S. operations, a move that could end months of uncertainty over the popular social media platform. U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent made the announcement during trade talks in Madrid on Monday, explaining that the framework lays the groundwork for American ownership of TikTok's U.S. arm.
We have a framework for a TikTok deal. The two leaders, President Trump and Party Chair Xi, will speak on Friday to complete the deal, but we do have a framework for a deal with TikTok.
In a post on his social media platform Truth Social, Trump wrote that the trade discussions had gone very well and would soon conclude. Without directly naming TikTok, he said an agreement had been reached with a certain company that young Americans were eager to see saved and predicted they would be very happy with the outcome. China confirmed that a framework agreement exists, but insisted that any deal would not come at the expense of its national interests or its companies.
Regarding the TikTok issue, China consistently opposes the politicization, instrumentalization, and weaponization of scientific, technological, and economic and trade issues. China will never seek to reach any agreement at the expense of its principled stance, corporate interests, and international fairness and justice.
The talks come as a critical deadline approaches. Under bipartisan legislation passed by the U.S. Congress last year, TikTok's Chinese parent company, ByteDance, must divest its American operations by September 17th or face a nationwide ban. The measure followed long-standing concerns in Washington that TikTok could share sensitive user data with Beijing, posing a national security threat. President Trump has already granted 3 extensions to the deadline, but pressure has continued to mount for a resolution. Trump also announced that he would hold phone talks with Chinese President Xi Jinping on Friday, while emphasizing the strong relations with Beijing. The phone talks could also spark a potential meeting between the two leaders during next month's APEC summit in South Korea. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Stock markets in major economies, including here in South Korea, continue their rally amid much anticipation of a rate cut by the U.S. Federal Reserve this week. Our correspondent Park Jun-an has more.
On Monday and Tuesday, stock markets in South Korea, the U.S., and Japan broke their all-time record highs just days before the U.S. Federal Reserve's interest rate decision. South Korea's benchmark Kospi climbed to 3,450 points during Tuesday's session, marking its 11th consecutive day of gains and setting a new all-time high for the 5th trading day in a row. In the U.S. on Monday, both the S&P 500 and the Nasdaq set new intraday and closing record highs. The S&P 500 index rose around 0.5% to break 6,615 points at the end of the session. On the same day, the Nasdaq 100 Composite Index surged around 1% to just below 22,350 points at the market's close. Strong performances in the technology and communication services sectors backed the market's rally. In Japan, the Nikkei 225 index broke the 45,000 barrier for the first time on Tuesday, reaching 45,055 points shortly after the market opened. The stock hike was attributed to positive outcomes from U.S. market gains ahead of the anticipated Fed rate cut and progress in U.S.-China trade negotiations. According to the CME Fed Watch tool, which tracks federal funds futures to assess market expectations for Federal Reserve policy shifts, there is a 95% chance of a 25 basis points rate cut at the upcoming FOMC meeting. The tool also indicated a 5% probability of a larger 50 basis points cut. Although a rate cut is widely anticipated, an economics professor noted that stock prices are already high even if the Fed decides to cut the rates.
With expectations of more liquidity and an economic rebound, markets are pricing in a rate cut. Stocks rose, but having already climbed, they could drop after the announcement.
As global markets continue to rally, the Reserve's next move and its narrative could either solidify these gains or bring new uncertainties to the markets. Park Junan, Arirang News.
The price of gold has seen its sharpest surge since 1979. Now, this is according to the Wall Street Journal back on Monday that pointed out gold had not seen such a rally since the 1970s when inflation soared in response to oil supply disruptions worldwide amid fierce fighting in the Middle East. The price of gold jumped almost 40% this year, outpacing gains seen during the COVID-19 market crash, as well as the 2007 to 2009 financial crisis. The newspaper claimed investors were flocking to gold as a hedge against economic uncertainty and inflation concerns linked to the Trump administration's tariff campaign. Meanwhile, South Korea's broad money supply rose for the fourth month in a row in July, driven by a rise in stock fund inflows. According to recent data from the Bank of Korea, the country's M2 stood at over $3.1 trillion in July, up 0.8% on month. Bank officials are linking this latest finding to increased deposits and strong inflows into stock funds. The M2 money supply includes cash demand deposits and other near liquid assets such as money market accounts and savings. Lawmakers across the aisle clashed on this Tuesday amid the Parliament's second interpellation session. The Q&A today centered on foreign affairs and security and was attended by Prime Minister Kim Min-seok as well as Foreign Minister Cho Hyun, among others. While the ruling Democratic Party highlighted the Lee administration's management of diplomatic and defense matters, the main opposition People Power Party fired back with the recent detention of South Korean engineers and technicians from the Hyundai plant in Georgia and Seoul's trade framework with Washington that has yet to be finalized. Over in the Middle East, Israel has launched an intense ground offensive into Gaza City, vowing to eradicate the Palestinian militant group Hamas. Our Park Hyo-bin reports.
Israeli forces launched a ground assault on Gaza City Monday evening local time, aiming to seize the Hamas stronghold. Al Jazeera reports that at least 8 people were killed and more than 50 were wounded by early Tuesday. Israel's defense minister said Gaza is burning in a post on X after heavy overnight strikes on the city. Speaking to reporters on Tuesday, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio also suggested the operation was already underway.
The Israelis have begun to take operations there, so we think we have a very short window of time in which a deal could happen.
While Israeli tanks pushed toward Gaza City, U.S. President Donald Trump warned Hamas on Truth Social to release Israeli hostages still held in Gaza, calling such an act a human atrocity. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu thanked Trump for what he called his unflinching support for Israel's fight against Hamas and efforts to free all captives. The ground push began just hours after Rubio met Netanyahu in Jerusalem. On Monday, both said the only way to end the conflict is to eliminate Hamas and free the remaining 48 hostages, about 20 of them believed alive, rejecting calls for an interim ceasefire.
We sent a message to the terrorists. You can run, but you can't hide, and we'll get you.
As far as the president's been clear on the ongoing issues in Gaza, and that is that every single hostage, both living and deceased, needs to be home immediately.
Meanwhile, Hamas insists it will release the captives only in exchange for Palestinian prisoners, a lasting ceasefire, and an Israeli withdrawal from Gaza City. Over the past week, Israeli airstrikes have flattened dozens of high-rises that Israel says were used by Hamas, and last Tuesday hit a building in Doha, Qatar, targeting senior Hamas figures. The Israeli Defense Forces has urged more than 1 million residents of Gaza City to move south to designated humanitarian areas. Some 300,000 have already fled. The coming days are likely to see heavier clashes as Israeli forces advance street by street. Park Hyubin, Arirang News.
Back here in South Korea, the Veterans Affairs Ministry earlier this week held a ceremony to celebrate a crucial chapter in Korean history and invited American war veterans in honor of their selfless service. Our defense correspondent Kim Bo-kyung reports.
Most Koreans are familiar with the Incheon landing, the operation commanded by General Douglas MacArthur to reverse the course of Korean War. Celebrating the 75th anniversary of this amphibious landing operation, the Navy held a ceremony on Monday at Incheon City Port. It is not just Koreans who consider the event meaningful, though. U.S.-Korean War veterans who were once stationed here felt the same way, too. Lois R. Quinn, who treated wounded soldiers aboard the hospital ship USS Haven in 1953 as part of the Navy Nurse Corps, was one of them. The 98-year-old was excited to be back in Korea for the first time in 72 years.
It's exciting, and I was trying to find out. I wanted to see where my ship was positioned for 8 months. We were anchored here for 8 months during the war, and then, like I say, after the armistice, they brought the POWs aboard, and we took the POWs back to the States. And we were due to come back the next year, but other things happened. But I have been keeping up with the South Koreans in California.
Rudy B. McKinn Sr., a former U.S. Marine who participated in the Incheon landing and the Battle of Chosun Reservoir, enjoyed the ceremony at the front row. He shared his story of how he got a Korean national flag from a Korean kid at that time, which is still hanging in his office.
And a little kid comes into the bivouac and says, "Is there anything you'd like for me to pick up for you?" He was looking for cigarettes or canned goods or something, anything we could give him. He was starving to death. So I said, "Yes, I would like a copy of, I would like a Korean flag." And he says, "I can get it for you."
The flag drawn on a rice sack was stained with blood from the Battle of Chosun Reservoir. It was framed the wrong way around, but as it's so fragile and weak, he says he just leaves it as it is. When memories of Korean War are shared through veterans, our history lives on through the generations. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
And in other news, researchers here have found a way to make biodegradable batteries from coffee grounds. Our Cha Yun-kyung explains.
1 cup of coffee contains around 15 grams of coffee beans. But almost all coffee beans are thrown away as coffee grounds, except for only around 0.2%. To find a use for it, Korean researchers have found a way to make eco-friendly disposable batteries made out of coffee grounds instead of plastic and metal. Coffee grounds are molded like clay and pressed into a metal mold. Magnesium alloy is used for the anode, molybdenum trioxide for the cathode, and an electrolyte is placed in between to complete the design.
Plastics require quite a complicated structure to make battery frames, while coffee grounds are easy to form with their open cell porous structure.
These eco-friendly disposable batteries have a higher voltage than a dry cell, with the power to light up a 1.7-volt LED for 1 week. Most of all, they are completely biodegradable. Since they are made out of magnesium alloy and molybdenum trioxide, they easily dissolve in water. After placing one in a flower pot for testing, it completely decomposed in rainwater within 2 months, and even new shoots began to grow.
It works perfectly as a battery. Furthermore, there is no need to collect the battery after its use, since it can decompose naturally.
The research team aims to extend the battery life and develop it with eco-friendly power technology for environmental monitoring sensors, such as those used for wildfire prevention. Cha Yun-kyung, Arirang News.
This is The World Now, bringing you the latest stories from around the globe. In the United States, President Donald Trump said on Monday that a second U.S. military strike on a Venezuelan drug cartel vessel killed 3 people. The strike took place earlier on the same day in international waters on Trump's orders and targeted what he called narco-terrorists, transporting illegal drugs towards the U.S. The president described the target as a vessel linked to Venezuelan drug cartels carrying cocaine and fentanyl. U.S. officials released a video showing the vessel exploding and burning. This operation followed a previous strike on September 2nd, which killed 11 people aboard another Venezuelan vessel accused of illicit narcotics trafficking. Trump said the drug trafficking cartels pose a threat to U.S. national security. Meanwhile, Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro strongly denounced the strike, saying the country would defend itself against U.S. aggression. The Kremlin said on Monday that NATO was already fighting against Russia with its support for Ukraine. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov said at a press briefing in Moscow that NATO is at war with Russia. It is obvious and needs no proof. He argued that NATO's direct and indirect assistance to Ukraine through weapons, training, and intelligence is de facto warfare. Russian officials believe that by aiding Kyiv, NATO is morally and practically in military conflict with Russia. Meanwhile, the UK has ordered fighter jets to Poland as part of a NATO air defense mission, following recent Russian drone incursions. The UK announced the deployment of RAF Typhoon jets to conduct air defense missions over Poland as part of NATO's Eastern Sentry mission. Poland has described recent Russian violations as deliberate provocations and threats to European security. Google's parent company Alphabet recorded a new landmark with its market capitalization surpassing $3 trillion for the first time on Monday. Its shares rose more than 4%, closing at a record high of nearly $252. This makes Alphabet the 4th company, alongside Apple, Microsoft, and NVIDIA, to surpass the $3 trillion mark. Fueled by stronger-than-expected growth in its cloud division and a favorable U.S. court ruling earlier that spared Alphabet from having to sell its Chrome browser and Android operating system, it has witnessed a roughly 32 to 33% stock rise this year, outpacing the S&P's 12.5% gain. Finally, at the Tokyo World Athletics Championships on Monday, Armand Duplantis won his 3rd straight world title with a jump of 6.3 meters, breaking the pole vault world record for the 14th time. The 25-year-old American-born Swede had already secured the gold medal before attempting the new record and nailed the 6.3-meter mark on his 3rd and final attempt. The new record is a centimeter higher than his previous record height of 6.29 meters, which he achieved in Budapest last month. Duplantis told reporters after winning the gold that this is like very much extra special because this is our most important competition of the year. Choi Ji-hee, Arirang News.
Showers have fallen across the country today. From late tonight, rain clouds will flow from the West Sea and it will begin to rain from the central and northern parts of Jeollabuk-do province and spread across the country tomorrow. The expected amount of rainfall is about 10 to 60 millimeters in the Chungcheong-do provinces and Jeollabuk-do province and 5 to 40 millimeters in the Seoul metropolitan area, Gangwon-do province, and Jeju Island. The heat wave warning has been extended in the southern parts of the country. However, the weather will be cooler in the second half of the week after the rain stops. The daytime temperature in Seoul on Friday will be 22 degrees, about 3 degrees lower than usual. Tomorrow morning, Seoul will start off at 23 degrees, Chuncheon at 22 degrees. Highs will move up to 26 degrees in Seoul and Chuncheon, Daegu and Jeju 32 degrees. There will be heavy rain in the southern Gyeonggi-do province, southern Gangwon-do province, and Chungcheongbuk-do province tomorrow. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
Those are the headlines at this hour here in South Korea. Coming up next is our daily panel session. Do stay with us.
Feeling overwhelmed by a busy life without knowing where you are heading.
Realizing your mind has gone completely blank.
If you need
some time and space,
stay, escaping from a hectic life and waiting for your heart.
Temple, a place for self-reflection through peace and calm.
Walking and being in nature.
Slowing down your body and mind.
Staying for a joyful journey to face your inner self.
Focusing on the present moment. Finding the true happiness with yourself.
Emptying. Filling. Temple stay.
Held its first debate over the weekend.
The economy is expected to expand 2.5% this year.
Korea's ties with its global partners on the sidelines of the Status UN summit.
A massive drone attack on Ukraine overnight on Monday and Tuesday.
Arirang.
Korea, the US and Japan conduct an air and naval exercise of Jeju Island this week, while North Korea condemns the defense drills as reckless. With more in Press Perspective today. Welcome to Press Perspective. It's Tuesday, September 16th here in Seoul. I'm Min Sun-hee. South Korea's latest defense drills with its ally the US and neighbor Japan have been denounced by North Korea as a dangerous display of strength that will have, quote, negative consequences. For more on this, I have Shiraz Reddy with NK News here in the studio. Shiraz, it's been a while. Welcome back.
Thank you for having me.
I also have Professor Park Won-gon at Ewha Women's University live on the line. Professor Park, as always, it's great to have you with us.
Thank you for having me again.
Shiraz, we'll start here in the studio. Let's begin then with details of the two major drills taking place here in South Korea and their significance, of course.
So yesterday, the Freedom Edge trilateral exercises between US, South Korea and Japan, as well as the Iron Mace bilateral exercise between South Korea and the US kicked off. And essentially, these are repetitions of exercises that have been held in the past, but they are significant as these are the first such exercises since President Lee Jae-myung came to power, and also since Donald Trump came to power, essentially. And the Freedom Edge exercise is a multi-domain exercise. It began yesterday and it will last until Friday. And this trilateral exercise taking place off the waters of Jeju Island essentially is designed to respond to North Korea's nuclear and missile threats and strengthen interoperability between the three countries. And it has happened before. It's something that was solidified during the former administrations of President Yoon and President Biden and Prime Minister Kishida, but it is now a regular feature of the trilateral cooperation. This year's exercise will also incorporate a lot of marine and air components and essentially be designed to strengthen the allies' deterrence on multiple fronts. On the other front, we've got the Iron Mace exercise, which has a more dedicated nuclear deterrence component, and that is essentially designed to strengthen allied deterrence against North Korean nuclear and missile threats. And this is another exercise that has been held twice before, in 2023 and 2024, but it's, like I said, it's the first time that they're holding this under Lee Jae-myung. We haven't really heard that much in terms of detail so far, but certainly it is the sort of exercise that very much seems designed to strengthen the two countries' nuclear sharing guidelines, as well as enact scenarios designed to deal with North Korean nuclear threats.
Right. Professor Park, according to the media here in South Korea, Seoul is seeking to downplay the latest Iron Mace tabletop drill. Could you explain this for us?
Okay, as Shiraz already mentioned, Iron Mace is part of a Putin last July's ROK-US combined nuclear and conventional operation guideline into action. That guideline, often called the CNI, Conventional Nuclear Integration, is designated to integrate the United States nuclear capabilities with South Korea's conventional forces to strengthen deterrence against North Korea's nuclear and missile threats. In practical terms, it is about the planning how our conventional assets would support or coordinate with the United States strategic assets, including nuclear-capable system in a crisis. This is not a live fire drill, though. It is a tabletop exercise, basically a simulation on computer that focuses on planning, procedure, and decision-making. By repeating these tabletop drills, both allies can rehearse a real-world scenario and turn them into the concrete guideline for joint response. But I haven't seen any kind of evidence that Seoul is trying to downplay Iron Mace. What we have seen is that, unlike previous rounds, where the exercise was publicized at the end, this time the two governments decided not to issue a press release, largely to avoid giving Pyongyang an excuse to react aggressively. The exercise was also delayed from the earlier in the year because of domestic political factors. That's not the same as downplaying it. Given that North Korea's nuclear threat keeps advancing, institutionalizing extended deterrence through exercise like Iron Mace is absolutely critical for South Korea. So sticking to the schedule South Korea and United States agreed on last year through the NCG, the Nuclear Consultative Group, is extremely important. Some people point out that there is no U.S. carrier strike group involved this time, and read that as downplaying. But from what I see, that's really about the U.S. global force management. Two carriers were unexpectedly sent to the Middle East, not about the reducing commitment to this exercise.
Right, Professor Park. Thank you for making that clarification then. Shiraz, as I mentioned at the start of this talk, North Korea, a day before the start of Freedom Edge, warned about negative consequences with regard to these joint drills. This was made, of course, by the sister of Kim Jong-un, Kim Yo-jong. Could you tell us a bit more about her remarks?
Yes. So Kim Yo-jong essentially repeated some of North Korea's frequent criticisms, frequent threats aimed at South Korea and the US, where essentially they look at the joint nuclear guidelines that the US and South Korea have been following, as well as these military exercises, as a nuclear threat essentially to North Korea. And that is the way they've often portrayed these things. How legitimate it is, that's a different matter. But from North Korea's perspective, all these exercises are designed as a direct threat to Pyongyang itself. And so essentially she threatened consequences for this, as she put it, this reckless show of strength from the two sides, and said that it will lead to bad results for the two countries. At the same time, the same day she released her statement, Park Jong-chun, the vice chairman of the ruling party's Central Military Commission, also released a similar statement condemning both Freedom Edge and Iron Mace. Once again, essentially, in his case, he emphasized the danger posed by Iron Mace, which he portrayed as an undisguised nuclear war rehearsal, which is very standard rhetoric from Pyongyang. This is how they frequently frame all US-led military activities in the region, particularly in conjunction with South Korea and Japan, where they say Washington is essentially the responsible party that is driving up nuclear tensions, driving up regional tensions, and increasing the risk of nuclear war in the region. And so, as is often the case, he went and used this to justify North Korea's own pursuit of nuclear weapons, and said to cope with the US and South Korea's nuclear deterrence, we are going to build up our own deterrent. And once again, that is something that is very typical of North Korea's approach, just to use all these activities to justify its own pursuit of nuclear weapons.
Right, and before we delve deeper into North Korea's nuclear ambitions, Professor Park, what potential response do you envision from Pyongyang, given the defense drills currently taking place here in this part of the world?
Well, statement from this Kim Yo-jong or this the Park Jong-chun, the vice chairman of the Central Military Commission of the Workers' Party of Korea, about this latest ROK-US exercise are nothing new. 4 years, especially since the Trump administration began, Pyongyang has consistently objected to joint drills, U.S. strategic asset deployment, and trilateral or multilateral exercise with Japan. In fact, even I, as a security researcher, have sometimes only realized a drill was happening because North Korean media complained about it. I see two main purposes behind these protests. First, is evidence of just how sensitive North Korea is to combine the exercise and U.S. strategic asset. in a way, Pyongyang is admitting that these drills, especially institutionalized extended deterrence and CNI level integration, really do weaken the effectiveness of its nuclear forces. Trilateral training with Japan further eroded the utility of North Korea's nuclear weapons from their perspective. So their pushback is partly a reaction to that. Second, North Korea hopes to influence Washington itself. They know that in the past, President Trump voices the skepticism about the cost and value of the large exercise, and that the United States military is increasingly focused on China. Pyongyang would like a repeat of June 2018, when after the Singapore summit, President Trump announced a pause or downsizing of joint drills and strategic asset deployment. So at the same time, North Korea is careful not to overplay their hand. If you look closely at the language in their statement, it's actually less inflammatory than before. Kim Yo-jong's last line was simply to remind the United States that such action could lead to bad consequences, a far cry from the old threat of punishment, retaliation, or strong countermeasures.
You're right, definitely something to think about, of course. Shiaz, as you mentioned earlier, North Korea, it has reaffirmed its resolve to advance its nuclear weapons program. Could you tell us a bit more about its latest claim with regard to this ambition?
Essentially, over the weekend, North Korea released a statement condemning the US and the International Atomic Energy Agency after the US raised the US envoy to the IAEA essentially called North Korea's nuclear program illegal and said that essentially the goal of complete denuclearization remains the ultimate objective. And this is something that North Korea has long objected to, of course, but in this case, very much it took the opportunity to respond to the US as well as the IAEA and labeled Washington's stance on the matter anachronistic, which it has done before, and doubled down on its nuclear ambitions. And at the same time, it also criticized the IAEA, saying that essentially in the past 30 years, North Korea hasn't really engaged with the IAEA, it hasn't dealt with it, so it doesn't see the value of hearing any such criticisms from the IAEA. All of this, of course, is very much typical of North Korea's long-standing approach, even in general, where they have affirmed their nuclear status, but it is something that has been particularly strong since 2022, when Kim Jong-un and North Korea's parliament essentially enshrined in law North Korea's nuclear status and said it is irreversible. And this is something that they have since then consistently doubled down on. Every time there's any talk of denuclearization, every time there's any military exercise or whatever, they always say our nuclear status is irreversible, and unless Washington changes its policies, changes its approach, they will see no reason to come back to the negotiating table. They will reject any demands from the US regarding this. And again, as with the military exercises, as with Park Jung-cheon's statement and Kim Yo-jong's statement, similarly, they always use this to say that the US is the real instigator for nuclear risks in the region. And so to deal with that, North Korea will stick to its nuclear program and pursue a strong strategic deterrent of its own.
Right. Keeping in mind North Korea's latest remarks, Professor Park, and of course the current state of geopolitics, what are the prospects of denuclearization here on the Korean Peninsula, do you think?
Yeah, it's a very difficult situation. On July 29th, and Kim Yo-jong made it very clear that in a public statement that North Korea's position of nuclear weapon is irreversible, as just mentioned, and that North Korea will not return to the denuclearization talk. And even during the September 4th summit with China held right after Beijing's Victory Day event, the word denuclearization didn't appear at all. North Korea isn't talking about denuclearization anymore. It's signaling that it wants nuclear arms control negotiations with the United States instead. In Washington, there is now a growing mainstream view that denuclearization itself is unrealistic. Some argue that the United States should de facto accept North Korea as nuclear-armed state and negotiate arms control. Others argue deterrence has to rely on military means rather than diplomacy. But if the goal of denuclearization is officially abandoned, North Korea will effectively become a recognized nuclear weapon state. But the good news is that although the Trump administration has not finalized its North Korean policy yet, and it continued to publicly mention the goal of denuclearization, South Korea and the United States urgently needed to coordinate closely to develop a joint policy. Seoul has already proposed a phased approach of freeze, reduction, and elimination, and it's critical for both allies to build a common plan together as soon as possible.
Right, which is what pundits here in South Korea have been saying. Shreyas, North Korea's first daughter, if you will, I'm talking about Kim Joo-ae, she has been garnering quite a bit of media attention recent times, especially given her presence at the Beijing Victory Day parade that Professor Park mentioned earlier. Authorities here in South Korea claim that she, Kim Joo-ae, may be the next successor. What is known about her, and what have you been hearing here on the ground here in South Korea?
Well, she's definitely an interesting character in the North Korean hierarchy, in that since she appeared in late 2022, she has been quite prominent, quite a public presence, and certainly not just North Korea, the world's attention has been focused on her because it represents something very different. But at the same time, very little is actually known about her, not even her name, to be honest, because North Korean media has never actually called her Joo-ae. That name is something that originally came from former American basketball player Dennis Rodman, and more recently, the NIS, South Korea's intelligence service, has essentially suggested that it is most likely Joo-ae, and for the moment, certainly that is our best guess when it comes to her. What we can say, however, is she is, with state media refusing to really talk about her directly or name her, for now, she is still essentially an extension of Kim Jong-un. She is an extension of the leader and his power and his significance. But we're also seeing her grow her own significance over time. We're seeing that obviously with her many public appearances alongside her father, and of course the most recent visit to Beijing, but also in the fact that we're seeing senior officials, senior generals bowing down to her, treating her with respect. So this does say there is something quite different about her, and also unlike former North Korean leaders and Kim Jong-un himself, she has been introduced to the public as a child. That has never happened before. And so what that tells us is they are treating her differently. Maybe Kim Jong-un wants to give her more time in the spotlight to be able to build acceptance with the North Korean public and the North Korean hierarchy, something he himself did not have because he was essentially fast-tracked into the leadership just before his father died. And what we're now seeing is, at the very least, even if we can't say with 100% certainty at this point that she will be the next leader, it's hard to ignore the possibility that she's being positioned as such, and her visit to China certainly builds up that narrative more, because this is someone who managed to go visit China at such a young age, accompany her father, that she essentially took the role in a sense that her mother once did, although unlike her mother, she was not involved in the day-to-day activities as such, but still it's a significant act in terms of visibility.
Right then, Professor Park, speaking as a distinguished scholar here in South Korea with matters regarding North Korea, what are your thoughts about the next leadership of the regime, and how do you explain a presence in China for Beijing's Victory Day parade?
Well, it's hard to tell at this very moment, but Kim Ju-e's recent visit to China looks very much like a diplomatic apprenticeship for a designated successor. When Kim Jong-un was formally welcomed by senior Chinese leader, including Chai Chi, the fifth-ranking member of the Communist Party Secretariat, Kim Ju-e stood directly behind him, receiving near number 2 protocol treatment abroad. That suggests Pyongyang is actively grooming her in public and foreign soil. That fits a historical pattern too. In 1974, and Kim Jong-il was named successor, and in 1983, his father, Kim Il-sung, took him to meet Deng Xiaoping in Beijing to secure Chinese backing. North Korea may again be seeking Chinese implicit recognition of the fourth hereditary succession, bring Kim Ju-e to Beijing for China's Victory Day celebration functions like a public debut before a key ally. Although only a single scene of Kim Ju-e's China visit was released to the international media, North Korea's own documentary footage show her repeatedly. This is clearly a way for Pyongyang to signal to its own people that a fourth hereditary succession is underway. But this move also carries risk. North Korea has no institutionalized number 2 position, so introducing a successor early could fear speculation about Kim Jong-un's health or political stability. Inside North Korea, the leadership must also manage to deeply patriarchal political culture that may be reluctant to accept a young female leaders. And if Kim Ju-e were to marry outside of Kim family line, it could erode the backpack to mountain narrative that underpins the dynasty's legitimacy. Finally, even if Kim Ju-e is formally designated at her age, she could not rule alone. That raised the possibility of a regency or the dual power structure led by figures like Kim Yo-jong or Choi Ryong-hae. Unlike Kim Jong-il or Kim Jong-un, also Kim Ju-e has no military credentials or long political apprenticeships, which could further complicate regime cohesion. These challenges don't mean Kim Ju-e isn't the fourth-generation successor. Rather, they show the kind of the obstacles that North Korea's system would face if it pushed ahead with making her the next hereditary leader.
Right, and of course, given those thoughts, that's why there is quite a bit of speculation about her prospects of becoming the next leader. I'm afraid, Professor, that's all the time we have for this session. As always, thank you so much, Professor Park, for your insights today.
Thank you.
And Shreya's here in the studio. Thank you very much for your time and your thoughts.
Thank you very much.
Right, that is all the time we have for this edition of Press Perspective. Thank you for watching, and do join us again same time tomorrow for more panel discussion.
이어온 우리의 지혜가 제천에서 다시 태어났어. 세대를 관통한 선조들의 건강 빅데이터. 빅데이터.